Hi, everyone. My name is Risa Nelson, and I have the privilege and honor of serving as the director of the Afro-American Cultural Center at Yale and assistant dean of Yale College. I'm honored today to speak with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Senator Amy Klobuchar as part of the 150th anniversary celebration of women at Yale. Today, I'll be speaking with them about what it's like to run for the highest office in the country, President of the United States, and a bit about women's leadership. First, I'd like to introduce Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, a 1973 graduate of Yale Law School, former First Lady, Secretary for New York State, Secretary of State, and the first woman to be nominated for President of the United States by a major political party. Welcome. I'd also like to introduce Senator Amy Klobuchar, Yale College class of 1982. Senator Klobuchar is the senior U.S. Senator from the state of Minnesota and the first female state senator elected from that state. She announced her candidacy for the Democratic nomination for the presidency in February of 2019 and endorsed Joe Biden this past March. Secretary Clinton, Senator Klobuchar, it is an honor to have you both here. So let's jump in. Victoria Woodhull, Belva Ann Lockwood, Margaret Chase Smith, the unbought and unbossed Shirley Chisholm, Patsy Matsu Takemoto Mink, Linda Jennis, Pat Schroeder, Carol Mosley Braun, and of course, several more tenacious women who have run for president since then. Regardless of one's political leanings, we can likely agree that it takes an enormous deal of intrepidity to set out to do what no woman has done before, serve as the President of the United States of America. So my question to you is, when did each of you know that you wanted to run for president? And what sparked that confidence that said, I could really do this and I'm going to? What ignited the courage to run and run again?
Well, Risa, thank you for having Amy and me on here to talk about this issue as you celebrate the 150 years of women first in the graduate and professional schools, and then, of course, in the college. I never thought I would actually run for office myself until the late 90s, when I was encouraged to run for the Senate from New York to succeed Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And at first I resisted that, said no. It didn't seem like it would be right for me. I felt very committed to helping other people get elected, as I had for years. Eventually, I decided to run. And it was hard. I really have to tell you, there's a big difference between saying, please support this candidate over here, and please support me. It took quite a while for me to feel comfortable doing that. And as I look back on it now, I think that my hesitancy, more than 20 years ago now, was in part because of the problems that confront women still in politics, because it is a big decision that you're going to run. So fast forward, after I'd been reelected to the Senate in 2006, a lot of people began encouraging me to run for president. And that was another really hard decision, because you're right. A few people had tried. Nobody had gotten a nomination. Nobody had even won a primary or a caucus. So as a woman, it was daunting, to say the least. But I thought not only did we need to have a new direction for the country in the middle of the second term of George W. Bush, but that we shouldn't be, disqualifying myself before I even got out there and tried. So I ran, as you know, in the 2008 primaries, got more votes than my primary opponent, but lost the nomination with the combination of delegates and everything that went with it. Ended up serving as Secretary of State for then President Obama. And after I finished serving in that position for 4 years, I left the State Department. And again, people said, you've got to run again, you've got to try again. And I thought hard about it, consulted people that I trusted and decided to run again. And that time, made a lot of progress, continued to win primary votes, ended up being nominated, and went on to the general election. But it's a huge undertaking. You have to build, an enormous startup from scratch. In my case, in 2016, it was $1 billion plus operation. So you have to be ready to go where most people don't know where to go and how to do it. And I'm glad that I ran, and I'm really excited that more women are looking at it. And I was thrilled when Amy and several others got on that stage this time around.
Thank you. Thank you. With Senator Klobuchar, maybe you can help me with the second question. I want to mention that opening question was actually motivated by my young niece, who's an advocate for girls and women fiercely supporting each other. And Senator Klobuchar, I heard an anecdote that when you decided to run for president, you called up Secretary Clinton. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about that call? Or Secretary Clinton, can you share with us any words of wisdom or support that you passed on to Senator Klobuchar?
Well, I couldn't think of a better person to talk to about this than Hillary Clinton. And we actually met, I remember, right before I announced, before I knew my announcement would be in the middle of a blizzard, but, it shows we have grit. And I'd say this about Hillary as we all listened to her tell her story there. There's another part of her story, and that is that even though Donald Trump became president, she did break that glass ceiling because history tells us she did, because what happened in 2018 is we had more women win than ever before. And today, as I stood on the steps with all those women senators and House members as the casket of Ruth Bader Ginsburg got taken down those steps, and this scene of the women that were inspired by her, but also inspired by Hillary to run, I don't think we can forget that. And from the day after the inauguration on, when millions of people marched all the way through to where we are. And when I decided to run, I not only took her advice, but I knew that there would be more women running. Not naive. And the fact that we had so many women running and that we came from different parts of the country. And when she ran, she was pretty much there on her own as the woman running. But here you have people from literally west to east and the middle. You've got people of different political views that are running, women of different political views. And the first day on that primary debate stage, we doubled the number of women that had ever, the first night, there were 2 nights, that had ever been on a presidential debate stage in the Democratic Party. So for me, that was important. And I did have one. Hillary's had every experience you can imagine, but the experience I had that unfortunately she couldn't, because she was the only one, was getting to be good friends of the other women candidates. And Kamala and I in particular would be like hanging out, complaining about how freezing it was on the debate stage, and that we literally told a sound person once, the technical person at NBC, this advantages the men. They do better when it's cold. You have got to turn the heat up in here. And there was just a lot of Kirsten. We just, it was a close-knit group. And again, it would not have happened if Hillary hadn't run. And there is no way all those House women that ran would have been so motivated than what she did, and really taking on the torch. I remember Billie Jean King once talking about in her tennis match with Bobby Riggs, not to make an analogy here, but that she felt like the burden of all women's sports was on her shoulders when she played that one match. And I think that was a lot what happened in that race, but the torch was passed in such a good way. So that's it's such a fitting analogy.
It's such a fitting analogy. And thinking about women trailblazing their ways through leadership, sometimes with few or no models, can you, Secretary Clinton, share how your experiences at Yale impacted your approaches to leadership? Do you feel that your experiences in the classroom or that your organizational affiliations or that your service while at Yale impacted your decisions to run for president?
That's a great question. I think going to Yale when I graduated from Wellesley College was a great decision. And I have to say it was motivated by an encounter that I had after I'd been accepted into both Yale and Harvard Law School. And I was invited to a cocktail party for people who'd been accepted but hadn't yet decided. And I actually was introduced to a professor by a friend of mine who was at the law school at Harvard at the time. And he said, "So Professor so-and-so, this is Hillary Rodham. She's trying to decide between us and our nearest competitor." And he looked down at me and he said, "Well, first of all, we don't have a nearest competitor. And secondly, we don't need any more women." That's when I decided to go to Yale. And I went to Yale because Yale, for 150 years, had welcomed women in the professional and graduate programs. And I found, even though the number of us was small entering in 1969, less than 10%, it was a tight-knit group. We lived through a fairly tumultuous time in Yale and New Haven history during my years at the law school. We had to really figure out what to do to organize ourselves against, some of the challenges we faced, including someone setting the International Law Library on fire one night and us forming a bucket brigade. So it was not only a really terrific legal experience. I met a lot of people who remain friends of mine to this day. Obviously, I met my husband when he came the following year after he finished up at Oxford. So it was a combination of both the experiences that we confronted, the friendships and support systems that we took with us when we left the law school. So I'm very grateful to for my experience there at Yale.
Thank you for that. While so many of our institutions and powerful organizations were literally not built for women, let alone women of color, I think it's more important than ever for our leaders at every level to really consider how we open doors to and strategically create opportunities for the recruitment, development, and advancement, especially of women leaders, because we know the tremendous impact that we can make on our communities and our larger world. Senator Klobuchar, this weekend's symposium celebrates the 150th and 50th anniversaries of women students at Yale University and college, respectively. And we are deeply proud of the accomplishments of these pioneering women and recognize the role, of course, of coeducation in their lives. How do you feel coeducation at Yale impacted folks who didn't necessarily identify as women, and how coeducation transformed Yale overall, academically, culturally, politically?
Well, I wouldn't be here if they hadn't gone co-ed. And in fact, when I got there in 78, it was just 15 years after, because undergrad, unlike the graduate schools, of course, had been all men. And I remember it was 15 years after they still had an Keep Yale Male Committee. And it changed rapidly. And I think that when I first got there, though, there was still a transition period. Because I remember in high school, we rarely had women as a girl as the high school student council president, right? I was the secretary treasurer, and my job was to sell the lollipops for raise money for the prom. And so that was a big transition during high school. And by the time I got to college, there were more and more women in leadership. So we had the first woman editor of the Yale Daily News when I was there in 1981. Mm-hmm. And so it was an interesting time, because I know you're shaking your head, Reza, but that is a true fact. Things were changing. And then I was able to see, of course, the same change. I feel like I'm kind of, again, on Hillary's shoulders, because she was there as the trailblazer. But when I get to the Senate, when she's there, there's not many women at all. Now we're up to 26. And just to give you some sense of it, in the history of the Senate and why this is such a big number, there have only been 56 women. And I was on the Trevor Noah show once, and he said, we were talking about it, and I explained that there were 2,000 senators, secretary in the history of the country, and only 56 were women. And he said if they had a nightclub with those numbers, they'd shut it down. It was just such a change. And so you really do, when you're in my role, you look at who was there who was there before you and what a difference that they made. But obviously we started to have, feminist classes, and there was just all kinds of things on feminism, on race that was changing at the time that really hadn't existed before then.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for sharing that. And I have one last question. I'm going to kind of take my time with this because I feel like the collective needs to hear this and needs to hear from you on this. This question was inspired by my son. I always seek to listen to and credit our youth. So like many of us, you have both faced some intense challenges. Unlike most of us, you've been on the world stage, right? We've seen you push through some really tough times, and your perseverance and just tenacity have inspired many. This past week alone, has been incredibly tough for so many of us. From the announcement that a grand jury has decided to indict only one of the 3 officers involved in the death of Breonna Taylor, may she rest in power, to the chaotic uncertainty with the Supreme Court appointment process and upcoming elections and potential transfer of power, not to mention the fact that we've been struggling with an environmental pandemic, a centuries-old racial pandemic, and a health pandemic that disproportionately affects Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people. And I said this past week, but really it's been months and years, right? So many of us, as Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, are looking forward to brighter days when this eerie time ends. And with all of that said, in these tough, but I truly believe revolutionary, transformative times that we're currently navigating, it can be really easy for people to lose hope. So in your dark or tough days, how have you continued to motivate yourselves to keep working towards your truly monumental goals and fighting for justice and equity? How have you, sought to take care of yourselves and your families, all while holding on to and passing along some hope? Are there any inspiring words that you can pass on to our viewers that might spark or reignite hope and courage to stay the course? Just briefly.
Well, for me, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life that we honored the last few days is that she never gave up. They told her she couldn't even go to law school. She graduates #1 in her class. They told her she couldn't make those arguments that she came up with the theories for on equality under the law, and she goes on that a man should make those arguments, and she goes on and makes them and wins 5 out of 6 cases. And then, through the wisdom of Hillary, who recommended her to be nominated by President Clinton, she ends up on the Supreme Court and becomes an international icon well into her 80s. So to me, that means the message there is you do not give up. And I think that is what we've seen. And if you want hope, it's all the people voting right now, despite everything you talked about, what we've faced. So much of it tracing back to a president that has lost all sense, never had it, sense of decency and dignity. A president that just wakes up every morning trying to figure out how to divide people. That when George Floyd is murdered in my state and people are looking for a president that will bring us together, that's not what he does. He literally is trying to undermine our election as we speak. And the fact that people still aren't giving up and that they are organizing virtually and that they are getting their absentee ballots and voting, in the words of Michelle Obama, like your life depends on it. To me, that is all the hope I need right now. And that's what gets us through, because I think we can have change in this country. And I think people are ready for it. And I just see it as there's just no way I'm going into this election negative. I'm going into it positive because of what I see around me. And you should have Hillary answer it.
Thank you. Yes, Secretary Clinton. Last
Well,
words.
I agree completely with Amy about the need to not only stay positive, but to translate that into action. Everyone needs a plan to vote, and I hope everyone who's viewing this and everyone they know will have such a plan, either to vote early, or if you're going to vote by mail, get your ballot in early, or if you're going to go on election day, be prepared to stay for however long it might take at your polling place. I think there's an enormous amount of energy, and I see much of that coming from young people. It was young people who were, responding to the tragedies that we've seen over the last months, George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, and sadly so many more. They were in the streets. They were peacefully protesting. They were making it clear that they expect real change. And as I've told many of them in conversations over these last months, you can't ever lose hope. You have to be willing to keep going despite the setbacks, and you have to be willing to participate in our democracy to literally save it, and voting for people who will agree with you to make the changes that are so long overdue and necessary. You know, whenever I think about hopefulness, I'm often reminded of an incredible thing that Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, you know, in the midst of, you know, so much despair, apartheid and violence in South Africa, where he was one of the voices standing up against that and hoping for a better future. And he said, look, I can't do anything other than that. I'm a prisoner of hope. That doesn't mean it always works out. It doesn't mean that you always get what you not only want, that's kind of minor, what you know is needed for you and for larger society to get better and do more to help more people. But I am very hopeful. I'm hopeful despite all of the obstacles, despite the setbacks, and as Amy rightly said, the very clear and present danger that this president poses to our democracy, that we're going to see an outpouring of people in this election because everybody knows what's at stake. Every single issue that anybody cares about is on the ballot because it's going to be an existential choice. And so please vote. Voting is an act of hope, but it's a very practical one as well. And I would expect everyone who is part of celebrating the progress that has been made at Yale knows that progress is possible. If you don't give up, you don't give in to despair, you don't quit, you are that prisoner of hope. So you can't do anything other than get up every single day and do your best.
I love that. And Risa, thank you for teaching me a new noun, intrepidity, that you use. I also
great word. It's a great word. And you know what you both were saying.
Yes.
From what you all were saying, it just made me think of Harriet Tubman. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. So yes, we cannot give up, and we must be warriors of hope. So Secretary Clinton, Senator Klobuchar, it was an honor to speak with both of you today. I thank you, and let's celebrate.
Well, and you know what? One more pitch is watch the Hulu documentary on Hillary's life. It's incredible. That was the first thing I watched during the pandemic. So there you go. That'll give you hope.
Thanks, Amy.
See you.
Nice. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.